Welcome to today's session with Mr. Hakan Yesilova. Mr. Yesilova is the editor of The Fountain magazine. He is an editor, writer, and translator, and he has made several important contributions to books such as I am really sorry for that. And he's contributed to a number of publications on Islam and interfaith dialogue, including a tribute to the Prophet Muhammad and the Sacred Trusts, and another important book called Toward a Global Civilization of Love and Tolerance. I will be asking questions for the first 40-45 minutes, and towards the end of the session, we will take questions from the audience. The audience is more than welcome to drop questions in the chat box. Are you ready, Mr. Yesilova?
Oh, yeah. Don't ask too difficult questions. Don't ask too difficult questions.
Okay, I will try. So I think we can begin by you telling the audience what The Fountain magazine is about. How would you introduce it?
All right. The Fountain is a bi-monthly periodical published in English language, but it has its roots back in Turkey. There was a Turkish publication that started in 1970s. It still continues with a different name, but The Fountain actually came out of that Turkish language publication. They first, I think, started The Fountain in 1993 in the United Kingdom. I guess because they found the United Kingdom to be too expensive, they thought it would be a better idea to move to the United States. I think that was in 1999. And yet, since 1993, The Fountain continues to publish on science, on faith, on arts and culture, pretty much on interfaith dialogue too. And we try to provide articles and content that is, we believe and hope, nourishing for both people's intellectual capacity, but also to their spiritual capacities. So that somewhat makes The Fountain a little unique than others, rather than just giving, just knowledge based on rationality or a scientific thought. The Fountain would like to meet our heart with our mind. That's somewhat of a marriage, which we believe the truth about the humankind can come out. So it's been ongoing since 1993. It's been 27 years. I've been a part of The Fountain since 2005. Before, I was a reader, and I really enjoyed reading The Fountain. And when I was offered the job, I happily accepted to be a part of it.
Wow, I share the feeling. I've read a few editions of The Fountain since I've been associated with In Dialogue, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. India is one of those places where The Fountain is actually available, so I'm very happy about that. Hello? I think, Alia, you've gone. I think you are disconnected, Alia.
Yes, I am really sorry. I lost you for a few seconds there. You said India is one of the few countries where The Fountain is available. Is it that?
Yeah, I mean, The Fountain goes to different parts of the world, but that's where the print edition is being actually printed. So that's a unique thing.
Okay. So you feel you said that The Fountain is an effort to make the heart connect with the mind. You feel that this is the unique feature of The Fountain. What do you feel makes it stand out?
Well, yeah, it sounds a little too abstract. I know, as we live in a time where everyone thinks in very materialistic, concrete terms. However, we believe the fountain is trying to address to that human nature in which we try to realize that human being it does consist of that spiritual capacity too. And if we cannot really make that introduction or that marriage, let me put it that way, I think we will only see the half of the truth, not the other way around. And this really comes through with our religious traditions. The human being has been graced with many messengers that God sent to us, and they brought basically the same message of human values, virtues, as well as that belief in a divine power who's in charge all the time. So for we know our even though we have come quite a far in terms of scientific discoveries and inventions, we still know the more step we take, we can actually see a greater darkness, a greater chaos, if I can put it that way, if we only try to see with our intellect, right? We see the universe is expanding, actually bringing in more things for us to discover, and everything also keeps changing. Who would know a little virus would have changed the world this much, right? So we still realize this is how weak we are. But imagine without the wisdom that we learn from our spiritual traditions, I think many millions of people would just leave this world without even understanding why they were here in the first place. So the scientific inquiries are really helpful in trying to understand how this universe actually works and operates. Or the better way of putting it, how this universe has been put to operate rather than it's itself operating on its own. But none of those scientific inventions are actually telling us why this is happening that way. So I think without relying on how our spiritual traditions are guiding us in this journey of life, I think we will be just going without really understanding anything about this life. So the fountain, it's a tough job. People really find it too difficult to write to us for making that marriage. And marriage is not an easy thing, right? It is not easy. And when people are too focused on one discipline, trying to bring in that spiritual wisdom into their scientific inquiry is not easy. So, but that's what we're trying to do with our authors. That's what our editorial team is trying to shape our content. So for that matter, I think what we're trying to do is a very meaningful thing.
I agree. I think one has to read the magazine to really kind of grasp what you're talking about. And I also feel that one of the themes is the interconnectedness of individual human beings and in groups to the larger universe. I think that's also one of them. Yeah.
That's right. Otherwise, I mean, when you look into the universe, we're just so alone. This planet, the human being. I mean, we really look like we're so alone. I mean, this doesn't help with our psychology, if I can put it that way. Feeling alone, but we're not alone, and all of that really makes sense. It's like a huge tree. Giving fruit only to a little fruit, right? So why was that tree, was it meaningless? No, that huge trunk, the branches, the leaves, all had their own beauties, and that fruit is such a meaningful product for us to really reflect on. I think the position of human being with regards to the entire universe is that little fruit, but which is so meaningful, which is so precious.
So what has been the idea behind the magazine since you've taken over?
Well, I mean, I really need to talk a little bit about the situation back in Turkey in 1970s when the people like Fethullah Gülen and others who came up with this idea of this publication where there's faith but also scientific thought in it. Turkey was really going through the very difficult times, as it is still going on. But in 1970s, people were very scared of their lives. I know how my parents used to tell me about when my father went out to work. They weren't really sure whether he would be able to come back. I mean, there was anarchy that was ruling the streets. There was this extreme right-wing and left-wing parties, usually from the youth, were so agitated to fight in the streets. They had occupied the schools. So this was followed by a military coup in 1980, after which things kind of settled down. But what I saw in the efforts of people like Mr. Gülen was to refocus kids and students to science, to reflect, to contemplation, that life is not cheap, that it's valuable, that they shouldn't hurt people, that they should really keep themselves away from the conflict in the streets. So I think this was why they came up with this idea of a publication where students are more oriented back to their studies and try to appreciate the value of life they must be enjoying otherwise. I think they later thought this was a brilliant idea that we need to share with the world. So they started the English edition in the UK in 1993. And then there were many editions in 8 different languages. So we're trying to maintain that idea of the value of human life and that we should be grateful for the blessings that we're bestowed with and to do so through both spiritual, studying spiritual traditions, but also to encourage, to trigger our rational capacity through scientific inquiries and content. So I think that's a very universal value that's not unique to the conditions in Turkey. We're going through many conflictual times all over the world. Just imagine the killing of one innocent man a few weeks ago, a Black African American, how it has triggered such a chaos in the country and around the world. So it's really important to inculcate into people's minds and hearts that human life is precious, that this life is precious, that we shouldn't harm others. For that's what our scientific disciplines, but also our spiritual disciplines teaching us. A holistic approach to this world, but with those 2 wings, I think that's how we can truly appreciate the value of human life here.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the themes also of the magazine and the articles that feature in it is self-actualization, how you can make yourself better and how to value yourself, not just others. That's also very important.
That's true. And also in the last 15 to 20 years, there's more content on interfaith dialogue too. I mean, since the founders were originally from Turkey, we have quite a bit of a Muslim influence there. But for the last 15 to 20 years, there's quite a content coming from non-Muslim authors too. For we all share similar values. We aim to achieve similar things in this life. As I myself am involved pretty much in interfaith dialogue here in the United States, I'm learning a lot from many non-Muslim communities too. So why shouldn't we put this same content in one cover? That's what we're trying to do in the Fountain.
I think we can have another interview about your personality as an interfaith dialogue practitioner someday.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I would be happy to be a part of it.
Okay, so now we go back to the magazine for today. What is the profile of the contributors to this prestigious magazine? Do you accept articles from folks outside the US as well?
Well, I mean, our manuscript system processing system is open to all. We don't really look where people are writing from. We run essay contests every year. The, quite a bit of a majority of submissions come from the US. That's right, but we receive a lot of contributions from all over the world too. Actually, one of the winners in this year, well, he's I think original from Afghanistan. I don't know where he lives now, but his article was a brilliant one. So he's one of the winners. And we of course publish a lot of people from different faith communities too, as I said before, rabbis contributing to us, Jewish priests contributing to us. So our main aim here is to see the content first without really looking at the author's name. When you read quite a bit of content, you would not really understand whether it's from a Muslim or a non-Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian. For what we are trying to reflect on our pages is to show people that we share a lot. Our purposes are the same also. We believe in the same divine power. We appreciate the same life and existence. So for that matter, we don't really look into the ID of the person who's contributing.
I agree. When I was first introduced to the magazine, I was told that it's affiliated with the Hizmat movement and, it's about personal development and things of the sort. I was a little shocked to see articles by all kinds of people, authors from all walks of life in this magazine. And it's a really interesting experience reading all those articles.
Well, that's true. I mean, I think that again reflects the spirit of Hizmet movement too. I mean, Hizmet movement doesn't have membership, so people feel affiliated to it by being either involved in a certain activity or by writing an article or by just simply feeling sympathy to it. So for that matter, what you see in the pages of the Fountain, I believe, reflects the true nature of Hizmet movement too.
Mm-hmm. So how would you feel that what are the values of the movement that you feel this magazine reflects? How do you feel it can be said that it's truly affiliated to the Hizmet or the Gulen movement?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a very, very secular family in Turkey who really had embraced the reforms with the Republican regime from 1920s. Not actually truly introduced, but probably more imposed on the society through the power of the state. But since originally we are from the Balkans in Kosovo, I think the kind of life styles that were introduced with the Republican regime really overlapped pretty much with the way my family enjoyed life in the Balkans. But they had to move to Turkey because of another oppressive regime under Tito in 1950s. So I grew up in a family where we would basically define ourselves as Muslims, but not pretty much of a practicing Muslims. When I really was introduced to Hizmet movement, which happened actually without us seeking it, I basically ended up in a school that was affiliated with Hizmet movement, one of the first schools, and I basically had scored enough to be a part of that school. And I later learned this was actually a part of a movement, but nobody had told me that there was this movement called Hizmet and there was this person called Fethullah Gulen until I was actually about to graduate. So what I saw in the Fountain, and it's in its Turkish edition, And of course, in the overall message of Mr. Gulen's ideas, I saw that, I mean, a person who grew up in a very secular family could actually be a good Muslim, but also be a part of the larger world where I could engage peacefully with those who do not want to be a part of a practicing community. So that was actually pretty much what I liked about Hizmet, that I could still coexist with those who don't want to define themselves the way I want. So when I saw Mr. Gulen on TV first, I guess, it was just, I was not expecting a Hoja, a scholar who really looked like a modern, normal, regular human being, rather than with the kind of clothing we would expect from a religious scholar. So I said, look, this is somebody I could follow, and who would keep me deeply rooted in my tradition of faith, but also who would help me be guided in this 21st century life, where I need to learn how to coexist with others. I think this is what I like about the fund, without trying to impose dogma. It's more trying to instill ideas or bring some arguments for us to reflect, for us to use our intellectual capacity and think that this life is not without any purpose, that this life does mean something, and that I could live with others. I think these were the three main ideas that I was pretty much, I had the idea of being embraced or welcomed by the Fountain magazine.
I think that's what appeals to the youngsters of today. They want to play with ideas and they do not want anything imposed on them. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we at In Dialogue have a large circle of young academics and authors. Do you feel that they can publish or they can write or they can make contributions to the Fountain?
Yeah, we actually published many young persons' articles before. I mean, our main approach here is that the Fountain has a level of language or a level of a certain sophistication. So as long as they meet those language standards, I mean, I would be more than happy to publish young people's contributions.
So coming on to your publications, you are an author yourself, and as we mentioned, you've contributed to a number of books and publications. One of the books to which you've made a contribution is Towards a Global Civilization of Love and Tolerance, which is a book authored by Hoja Findi Fethullah Gulen. What role did you play in that publication of that important book, and can you briefly tell us about the content of this book?
Yeah, that book was, I think, published about 15 years ago. That was one of the, I think that was when I started actually having full-time position as an editor. So that book was one of our first really serious publications to show the wide scope of Fethullah Gulen's ideas. So when you look into the content of that book, you could see how he approaches the human being, how he understands love, what he would say about ideas like tolerance. So when you get that book, you actually don't need any other book further to understand, in a summary, in a nutshell, who this person is. How was he so able to convince people to go throughout the world, to the remote corners of the world, to open schools, to open dialogue institutions, to engage with others. And imagine, Turkey was a place which was pretty much proud of being singled out from the rest of the world. I mean, you wouldn't find too many Turkish people speaking foreign languages. And that's probably a sense of pride in many ways. And that has to do with being probably not colonized too, that we did not learn pretty much any foreign language. And that really doesn't help a lot in this case, keeping Turkey out of the global game. But imagine this person, this preacher, is coming out and convincing those young people to learn languages despite the environment, despite the lack of quality schools in the country to enable you to learn new languages, to go to the remotest corners of the world and to start schools. And that must be a very powerful source. And when you read this book, Toward a Global Civilization of Love and Tolerance, you could see that those two words actually are so pivotal in this, that you could see the love that comes from the love of the divine, and which you could truly observe in the life and practices of Fethullah Gulen. As he talks about Prophet Muhammad, you could see him many times crying and weeping. As he talks about the message, the universal message that he brought, you would see him crying and weeping. And again, I mean, this is against the macho male figure, a man crying, always crying on the pulpit. And that was because of the love he felt for humanity, that the love he felt for this world, that the world deserves better, that the humankind deserves better. And he thought the key to solving these problems would be through education. So again, the best graduates of our people, of our youth in late 1980s and early 1990s, graduating from the top schools of Turkey, going out to the world, forsaking many possible future careers in Turkey. And we Turks are pretty domestic people. We love our homeland. We love to be rooted there. We want to die there. So, I mean, I now live in the US. And of course, I have conversations with other Turks. So they invite their parents. And as they get older, they don't want to come anymore. If I die, what happens? You know, will you be burying me there? You know, they just cannot grasp the idea of being buried outside of Turkey. I mean, this is something that really needs huge power and a source of inspiration to take that very tough step further. And this person has been enabling people for the last 50 years, for the last 60 years, perhaps. So this book, Love and Tolerance, I think gives a very broad idea about the motivations and dynamics Fethullah Gulen was inspired from, so that he was able to inspire others. My role here as the editor of the publication, of our publishing house in Istanbul, of course, I was working with many colleagues with me, some of whose names are listed actually in the book, to produce this book as something to share with the world, so those who are not familiar with this scholar can better understand in one volume his thinking, his thoughts, his ideas.
I've had the privilege of reading that book, and after talking to you today, I think I understand it a little better today. Thank you so much for that. So how long have you known Mr. Gulen? Have you met him? Do you know him personally, or are you just a follower?
Well, I mean, I was a very young person, of course, in 1980s when I started school. I think it was my third or fourth year in the school. I was hearing about this famous Hoja coming to this mosque, and he was going to deliver the sermon. So everybody is, not only in the school, but also around the city in Istanbul, they were talking when he came to the mosque. When he was scheduled for a certain sermon, I mean, tens of thousands of people were flocking in. So it was impossible not to notice. And his audio cassettes were available too. And I remember myself being introduced to his ideas first through an audio cassette of one of his sermons. And I actually thought, this person, did he really have this time, journey in time? Did he go back to the 7th century Arabia? Was he there? I mean, he was talking about the life and events around the prophet to so powerfully that I really thought this person must have made that journey in time. Of course, he himself weeping and crying all the time. I think as a young person, I kind of thought this imam is not an ordinary imam. I mean, back in Turkey, that's how it used to be. I'm not sure how things are being run today, but imams and preachers were handed in the sermons they were supposed to deliver on Fridays. So they don't come up with something on their own. But you would see and notice in this person something that is different. The power of rhetoric is there. And he has constructed his ideas in such a way that it doesn't move out too much from the main idea. So I think that's power of inspiration was there when I was first introduced to him. But nobody really told me as I was in the school about this person that, look, this is the person you should follow. No, it was a part of the culture. It was a part of the society there. So, but as I was telling you, my family was a little secular family. I later learned they were concerned whether I was going to be under the influence of a religious movement. Is it a cult? What is it? I mean, who is this preacher? Since they were so separated from the mosque and from the wider religious community, they wouldn't know. And I'm now sympathizing with their concerns about me. But when they, I think, saw him on a TV interview, it was probably 1992 or 1993, I don't know. I remember my father told me, is this the person you want to follow? I said, yes, then I support you. This is a person to follow, which was groundbreaking and a turning point in my life. And of course, this doesn't happen only through one person. My parents saw my teachers. They really loved my teachers. I remember them visiting our home. When I had a little injury, 4 of my teachers coming and knocking on the door without letting us know on a very surprise visit. And it was just a very interesting time to see your teacher visiting me. So I really owe a lot to those young teachers back in 1980s and 90s. So, of course, in time, I had the chance to visit him. Of course, I'm now in the US. I'm more lucky than thousands of other people who don't have the opportunity to come. I usually try to visit him to discuss on some of our publications. We ask his wisdom. Of course, we ask his prayers when his health avails. So I think of course, among thousands of other people, it cannot know everyone, but I think we had a kind of this experience of being in the same room together a couple times. I think he would know me when I visit him.
So what does he still have, does he still say things that surprise you, shock you about his dedication towards his work or his feelings towards others? Both of us know that he feels really strongly about others and he is very deeply caring. Is there anything that surprises you even now?
Well, I mean, it's of course what has happened recently in Turkey has been overwhelming, and it's just imagine a country has dedicated its entire mission to destroy this movement. Let me put it that way. And of course, Mr. Gulen is the spiritual source of inspiration of this movement. So he has been the main target, sadly. But each time I visit him, of course, he's very sad. Of course, he is devastated to hear the sad stories of victims in Turkey, those people drowning in the sea trying to flee the persecution, mothers being jailed with their babies in their arms. Of course, this is very devastating. But each time I see him, I also see this great hope and trying to stand strong so that he still continues to be a source of inspiration for people like me and others. So, I mean, this is just amazing given his age, given his health conditions. I think that's just amazing. Back in March, I think, or late February, when this coronavirus erupted all of a sudden, and of course, he was being informed by his friends about the developments. And he had actually said very early, and Professor Enver Alam wrote beautifully about this, and we published that in the Fountain. He took a very serious approach to obey with the rules of social distancing, to basically pursue whatever our rationality is telling us, whatever scientific inquiries are telling us. And he basically imposed that self-isolation himself too. And he even said at one point, even the Hajj, perhaps probably better be not done this year. I mean, Hajj is compulsory and it is done as a congregation. But he even took the further step that it's probably better for Muslims not to do the Hajj this year if this will cause more death and casualties. And again, his other concern was that, of course, in addition to Muslims' health and other people's health, more importantly, perhaps, how others will be blaming Islam for making such a worship compulsory, even under these pandemic conditions. I think that that's something that all Muslim scholars really need to consider. And if many religious leaders should have taken the necessary steps early on, perhaps pandemic would have been contained better. And as I said, please read Professor Alam's piece on the recent Fountain article.
I think one of Hoja Findi's message, one of the aspects of his message that really stands out is that he urged everybody to abide by the restrictions imposed by the local government, and he also requested people to assist their local governments in any way they can. And as we see, Hizmat volunteers have really stepped in and provided a lot of relief and support in these trying times.
That's right. That's right. And by the way, I should have said that I wish health and protection to all of my friends in India under the pandemic conditions. I know it's tough in the US and it's also tough there. That's what I've been hearing as well. I hope all of you are protected and safe.
I hope the same for everybody watching and even those not watching. But what would you say that however Hoja Fendi is, the way he conducts himself, his sermons and his message, do you feel that whatever inspired you the most about him has changed through the years, through your association with the Hizmat movement?
Well, I mean, as a young person, of course, I'm trying to remember how I was inspired in the first place. But as I try to explain, I think his deep love for the Prophet, his approach to making religious practices relevant, but still being a part of the larger modern world. I think that still is one of the core messages I get from him. Secondly, his deep concern. He's really troubled with the problems of the world. You could see when he sees people failing in representing their true human quality. I think he's deeply concerned. He's deeply sad to see all those examples. I think this is something we need. Without sorrow, feelings like compassion doesn't really come out. So the true tolerance and the feelings of love and compassion that comes out of him actually is arising from the pain he feels inside. That's, you may relate this to other leaders of faith communities in the past. You could see how Prophet Muhammad was so deeply concerned as he was retreating to the cave on the mountain Nur, right? He was basically so devastated to see the ignorance in people. You would see the same in Jesus too. I mean, Moses, these people really retreated from the community, for they were so hardly hit in the heart. But without that retreat, without that pain that they felt inside, we would probably not have our faith traditions evolving the way they did. So I'm really, of course, grateful to him for this deep pain he's feeling inside. Perhaps on behalf of many of us who are so deeply involved in our personal lives rather than what other people are going through. Having people like Mr. Gulen, who suffers for the world, who really feels the pain of all others, I think this is what our world really needs.
I agree. I really feel that he helps us negotiate this secular world with ideals of hope and compassion, things that are really needed in this world.
I mean, one
And
last thing perhaps, Ali, I could say is he's always a very cautious person. He doesn't want us to fail to our weaknesses and to basically act on our emotions. I mean, although he feels the pain in his heart, he still wants his community to move forward with rational ideas, with rather common sense, and trying to do best not to harm others, not to disappoint others with our own emotions, and acting upon our eruptive feelings. No, he says, use your mind and not cause any harm to others, and think long term. So I think that's important for us to also to explore, which is not easy, considering things happening in Turkey. And people, many people, many Turkish friends, I mean, they feel that hatred inside. They don't want to forgive. But I mean, for the last 4 or 5 years, that's what Mr. Gulen has been teaching us to learn how to forgive, how to show mercy, not to retaliate in the same manner. I think that if you analyze his sermons in the last 4 or 5 years, this is the main thing that comes up, so that we can learn how to forgive.
I agree. I think that's how he's handled the past six, 7 odd years, and since the time from 2016. I really agree with whatever you just said. Now I will move on to the questions and comments from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is there any effort to simplify the language of the Fountain magazine from academic English to simple English? No, you really have to let us know on that.
Well, I understand the question pretty well, but sometimes simplifying is more difficult than writing
Yeah.
difficult. That's one thing. And secondly, I understand the way people speak English around the world really varies. So it's hard to really keep something that is both consistent but also universally relevant. I mean, this is something I always try to keep in mind. But I think what we're already having through YouTube, through other social media platforms, we already have enough of simple language. I think let us keep, it's better to keep that level of sophistication and perhaps knowledge and language so people can dilute it in their own social media postings. That's something else. But thank you.
Okay.
That's a very important question, and I understand the main idea.
Okay. In that case, I have a comment to make. Maybe sometimes you can have articles that are a little shorter and easier to follow in one read.
But there are actually very short articles. If you look into our A Moment for Reflection corner, I think that's pretty easy. Stories are there. So I mean, just as a side note, one doesn't really need to read all the from cover to cover all the content. Sometimes you're more attracted to a certain type of writing or a certain author, but others may just like the poetry inside the magazine. So that's again a very personal choice.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. The next question is from Arshad Rahmani, and he asks, according to you, what is the best way to submit to spirituality, and how can a person find the right path to move on?
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful question. Of course, it's a very personal journey. For instance, this past Ramadan, of course, I'm a Muslim and I'm trying to practice my faith, and I fast. And in the month of Ramadan, of course, Muslims used to go to mosque for Taraweeh prayers. I mean, we shared iftar dinners together. Huge groups of people used to getting together. But now, because of the pandemic, we were unable to get together with others. So what we did was we prayed our Taraweehs at home alone. Or if we had kids old enough, perhaps you did so. But my experience, and when I asked from my friends from different parts of the United States, they said this has been one of the best Ramadan they ever had in their lives. And the reason was, since we were too much of engaged in community before, I mean, and of course we don't take vacations usually in the month of Ramadan, which would be really good if we were able to do so. We realized we were overwhelmed with moving, with commuting, with riding kids to schools, or trying to go to iftar gatherings and Taraweeh all together in the mosque, finding a parking place for your car. Too much of things that really kept us busy, but also exhausted. So again, I mean, I was so happy that I was able to read my Quran more consistently this time. I was happy to pray longer hours standing this time in this year. What I'm trying to say is everyone has his or her own spiritual journey to God. All right. I'm not undermining our community congregations. Of course, in the Islamic tradition, it's compulsory to pray together, like on Fridays. Taraweeh prayers usually prayed together. Sharing food is very important. That means community again. But I think everyone has or her own spiritual journey to God, which is something that we sometimes ignore. For we already are nourished with the joy of the community. But now, probably many people had his or her own inquiry inside. Why am I fasting? I mean, this is, I mean, from a secular perspective, that's nonsense. Why am I making this torture on me? Why can I not drink my tea in the morning? So, but when you're on your own, you really stop and think, okay, why am I doing this? And you probably, I mean, that was my experience at least, and that's what I felt from my friends. When you read the Quran on your own, together with the divine, I think that's, a very important experience we should not ignore. So for everyone has his or her own journey. That's something that we need to know. But of course, our religious traditions have taught us some formulas, some good advice, and because they worked. I mean, were the things that were benefited by thousands of people before. So why should we just ignore that huge heritage? I think it would be nice for everyone to spend some time all alone and reflect, have that contemplative practice on their own. For our soul and our spirit has been really equipped with that capacity to make that journey. But we're sometimes cluttering it with our material, physical being, so much so that that spirit cannot come out, with the exception of our dreams, perhaps. Even our dreams are shaped with our personal journeys to God. So my advice as someone who's failing all the time in this journey, of course, is to spare some time only for your own. When everyone else is sleeping, wake up and spend 10 minutes to feel and contemplate. As our Prophet Muhammad says, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, spending an hour in contemplation is equal of a worship for an entire year. So contemplation, this is something about the fountain too. This is why we publish things on astronomy. This is why we publish things on human body, for that helps you or the readers, all of us, to contemplate. Look, this cannot be by coincidence. This has a purpose. This is so precious and valuable. So my, again, advice would be to spare some time for our own.
I think as somebody who's been following Hizmat literature for a short while now, I think that really resonates. I think that reflects Hizmat's values of to each his own. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why it's a very secular movement. We see so many people from different religions affiliated with it.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, however you may want to define this movement, but my understanding is in the ideas of Mr. Gulen and in the pages of the fountain is that human life is very precious, and we really need to give credit to whomever we want to give that credit to. Of course, as Muslims, first to God, but also to our fellow human beings with whom we share this world, without recognizing the quality, the preciousness of the human, regardless of their race, regardless of their faith traditions, just for being human, everyone deserves that recognition.
And the next question is from Shir. And they thank you for being there on the program today. And his question is, will the fountain be available on apps version 2 soon or not? I think that's a very interesting question.
Well, the fountain app is already available. I mean, just look for it in App Store. It's already there.
Oh, okay. And the next one is from Basit. Oh no, it's a comment, and he says that you have to understand the Quran and implement it to lead a better life. And there are quite a few people who totally, absolutely agree with you, and they're letting you know again and again, and I think I should convey that to you. And then we have Shir again asking how one can subscribe to the fountain in India.
Well, I guess Behzat would better give a better answer to this. I think in Dialogue community, they're helping out with us to help people read and reach out to the fountain. So In Dialogue Foundation would be the address.
Sure. So they have to write to Delhi at indialogue.in to get a subscription. Okay.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And then we have Abdul Ghani Punjabi saying that we really need such people, people like you, and really open-minded people to lead a better life. Next question
Thank you.
is by Abdul Rahman, and he asks, can you please share the positive responses you get from the readers of Fountain magazine from various communities, I think he means.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the Fountain Magazine website, let me see, there was one beautiful recent feedback we received from a Christian chaplain. This is by Eileen Grace Delusong from Canada in Toronto. She says she's actually a Christian chaplain serving at a detention center in Toronto. He says, I just want to let you know that your magazine, The Fountain, is quite a popular and much requested periodical here at our jail. The subject matter you cover in the beautifully laid out pages are diverse and written with critical thought, which makes it educational for our inmates to read. I have another letter that I received from a Christian priest. He says he's a Christian priest, but he's also searching, he's in the search of the meaning of this life. So the Fountain was one of the two sources of knowledge that he was reading for the last couple of years. So a beautiful letter, which I have framed here in my office. So I think it is so far, it's been pretty positive. The way I think we address contemplative thought in our pages, people really love it. The way we took a little bit of a distant approach to the events rather than giving very prompt and a little unsure responses to the current affairs. I think the way we take a little stance from a distance and try to understand the phenomena in the world, that's something I think people love a lot.
Okay, and I am back again. My phone wasn't working properly. I hope you can hear me now. Am I audible now? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So the next question is by Dr. Farhat Nasreen, and she asks, if you were to describe the Fountain magazine as a fountain of, how would you fill in that blank? What words would you use to describe the fountain?
That's a beautiful. I would probably say wisdom. I mean, we don't run laboratories. We don't have universities that we are affiliated with. What we basically do is to, of course, benefit and learn from scientists and try to analyze it in a way so that the wider readers can learn and better understand the human life here in this world. So I think that's how I would define wisdom. For there's already enough knowledge and information all over the world, if you see what I mean. Quran is not a book of science, but you could find a lot of source of inspiration for scientific explorations there. And the Quran and other actually Holy Scriptures are giving us perspectives on how to understand this world and life. So the Fountain is trying to, in a way, be in that path of giving some perspective to our readers. There are thousands of magazines here in the United States, thousands of similar publications that focuses on science and Scientific Thought, or those other magazines that are publishing per se on religion. Uh, but I mean, giving a perspective, the way I was trying to explain all through this morning here in the evening in India, is something I believe unique, and I would basically summarize it as a wisdom as we understand, humble in a very humble way.
I agree with that. And the next question is by Mr. Behzad Fatmi, and he asks, what is India's place in Mr. Gulen's thoughts and works?
I think last year was 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birth, and Tushar Gandhi was very kind to share an article about his grandfather with us. So we were able to honor that that great man. Um, I believe India, with its diversity, and of course with the message and legacy Mr. Gandhi has left behind, uh, I think that's how we, and Mr. Gulen, and I think the larger Hizmet community has shaped their ideas about India from that circle of historical legacy that India represents. But I mean, I'm not an expert on India. I did not follow well about how Mr. Gulen, uh, what he said before about India. But of course, I know his many times he referenced to Mr. Gandhi's legacy about keeping India together as one powerful country. And of course, his peaceful, non-violent stance towards oppression and discriminations. I think this is something that Mr. Gulen shared and referred to many times in his career.
The next is a comment by Mr. Muammar, and he filled in the blanks for Dr. Farhat Nasreen, saying that the fountain is a fountain of wisdom. So you have quite a few new followers in India now.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. The next is Dr. Nasreen again, and she asks, has working for a beautiful magazine like The Fountain impacted you personally? Has it changed you in some way?
Well, of course, in each issue, I learned very new things about the brilliantly beautiful universe that we live in. There are many scientists writing to us, and each time they introduce something new about our lives. So that's something that I really want to inculcate in our readers, especially within the Hizmet people too. For many have been heartbroken because of the recent events. So I try to change their perspective to the larger beauties that we're actually enjoying in this life. That we're so blessed with being a human being in the first place, being a rational creature that has the capacity to respond to the divine. So that really, in each issue I read, I'm filled with this amazing feelings of hope and, of course, appreciation. That's something I think I learn in every issue. But also this helps me in my other presentations, which I'm invited to speak on behalf of the Muslim community. I always try to bring other dimensions to faith rather than introducing faith in just a simple, concrete, disciplinary format. Okay, this is what you do. You wake up in this time before the sunrise, you pray, and then at Zuhur time, this is what you do. For fasting, this is when you wake up. I mean, this is such a structured form of religious faith. But when I try to bring other sources of information from different disciplines, I think being a practicing believer becomes more enjoyable, for then you really understand the meaning of your fasting. For now, there's very strong scientific evidence that fasting is a very healthy thing. I have a family member here in my home. She had started a very rigorous fasting for the last couple of months, but after 1 or 2 months, she had already stopped using her medication, antihistamines, against her allergies. And this really happened with fasting. So you can see with scientific thought, which we try to publish in the Fountain, you also start appreciating the way some of your faith tradition is teaching you to practice. I think that's something that I would say that I enjoy a lot as I try to edit the Fountain content.
Okay, so the next question is also about, and they ask whether it's available in PDF format.
What format? I couldn't get you.
In PDF format.
PDF format?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we send to the printer as a PDF document, but when you download the app, I think what you see is something like a PDF document anyway, which you can magnify the pages, and that's what you see. We used to have the Fountain under platforms like Isu. I think we're not uploading that anymore, but we're also under Kindle. I mean, what you see there is almost similar to the PDF page anyway.
Okay. And the next question is by Dr. Farhat Nasreen, and she asks, do you think that sometimes limits have to be set to forgiveness? Can you be too forgiving?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. It is perhaps, again, a very personal thing that everyone really needs to consider on their own. We know, I mean, for instance, when your kid, your son or daughter, walks on a cliff, on the edge of a cliff, and you want her safety, right? And you tell her once or twice, several times, and at one point you really need to put a discipline if he or she is not listening. And of course, forgiveness is important, but setting rules is sometimes more useful for the safety and for the livelihood of the people you love. I think we really need to set balance in this, but of course, God Almighty is the most merciful one, and even if He is setting rules for us to follow so that we don't fall off the cliff, I think we parents and those who are the leaders of the society or communities or families really need to strike a balance in this so that they can ensure safety and do not violate the rights of others. I mean, imagine again, I'm giving this example from kids, for I have 2 sons, and of course that's a challenge to raise 2 sons in our modern times. I know we don't want to violate the rights of our neighbors. So if my kids turn the volume on too much when they watch TV, I have to tell them that, look, this is not right. And I give them a few chances, but if they don't comply, I think they need to know that they will be grounded for a certain time, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't know that our neighbors had the right to have silence, have quiet in this home. I think balance is needed in this.
And then a few more comments. Dr. Farhat Nasreen says that it was a lovely reply, and she says she couldn't think anyone could have answered it better, and she thanks you for the talk.
That's
Yes,
very,
you. Yeah,
that's very kind of her. Thank you.
yeah. I think everybody's full of praises for this talk, and I really think we can have another session because there's so many layers to your personality. I think we have a lot to discuss. But
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
all for today, and really thank you for taking time out for us, and we will be sharing a recording of this yeah, and we will be sharing a recording with our viewers so that they can forward it to whoever they feel would be interested. And we look forward to everybody's feedback, including you, Hakanabe. You can let us know if you have any ideas about how to make this better. And the big news is that next week at the same time, Saturday India time, 6 p.m., Dr. Farhat Nasreen will be addressing us. She'll join us at In Dialogue for her talk on pop culture and social harmony. Okay,
Beautiful.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Alia and Behzat. I wish good luck to you, to the in the dialogue platform. And of course, I'm thankful to everyone who joined with me tonight. Tonight in India, morning starting here in New Jersey.
Yeah,
Again, I wish good luck and the protection from all sorts of pandemic and viruses, be it visible or invisible. So all of you take care.
I mean, bye bye.
Bye-bye.